Hi, Britt.
Hi, Kristian. How are you doing?
Good. So today we were thinking about talking about the political candidates, and you just got your citizenship, and so now you can vote. Did you ever think your first election would feature Trump versus Hillary?
I did certainly not. There's actually an episode of Sex and the City in which Mr. Big, the one that Carrie is after, where he is compared to Donald Trump. Of course, that was before he became a political candidate. And I would never have thought that I would be voting for Hillary versus Mr. Big.
And so we were going to kind of today talk about their personalities and how that fits in.
Relates to this book.
Yes.
The Superhuman Mind. So we're going to talk about the minds of the candidates and whether they have any super traits, personality traits in this case. So if you want to read more, you can read it in The Superhuman Mind, and then let's get to it.
So let's start with Trump.
Let's do that.
So there's the big five personality traits, and for people who don't know, that's kind of the set of five personality characteristics that psychologists use to kind of define different personalities, and they're thought to be kind of they don't change over time. You know, once you get to a certain age, they kind of seem to stick. And what are those traits, Britt?
So one way to remember them is that you can abbreviate them as ocean, so as the sea, right? Ocean, so OCEAN. The O stands for openness, and openness is in particularly openness to new experiences. The C is conscientiousness, and then you have the extroversion versus being an introvert. So that would be the E, and then the A is the agreeableness, and then N is neuroticism. So that would be how anxious you are as a person, not because of seeing a snake or something like that. So those are the big five. So we could talk about Trump a little bit and see where he lands on those big five.
And those are you rate those, right, kind of on a scale where they're high or low, right? So some people are higher than others in a certain trait like agreeableness or...
That's right. So you are not just agreeable or not agreeable. You are agreeable to some extent or very disagreeable. And we could start with the easy one. So the easy one, of course, is extrovertedness. It has been said that Obama is not naturally extroverted, but all politicians sort of are forced to become extroverted to some extent. And so to that extent, we can say that both Hillary and Trump, we're talking about Trump, is definitely extroverted. So that one is easy. Another one that's easy, it seems, just judging from his behavior, which is all we can do, given that he hasn't come to our personal clinic to talk to us about his personal issues. But
we haven't invited him yet.
We haven't invited him yet either. But he is low on neuroticism, right? He doesn't seem very anxious. And the way he comes across certainly doesn't seem very anxious. Then the trickier questions then are conscientiousness and agreeableness. Of course, a lot of his behavior seems very disagreeable.
And not always very conscientious either.
And not very conscientious. And then there's some question that we'll raise later about whether part of that is an act. So there's the question of whether he's a social actor, which means that he acts as a personality that he's not necessarily. That's, of course, something you can do. So when people are really good social actors, they might have a different personality than the personality they really have. So just to mention extroversion again, So extroversion is something you can obviously act as if you're extroverted, even if you're introverted, right? So the question is, he doesn't come across as conscientious. He doesn't come across as agreeable. We'll talk later about whether he has any agreeable features. And openness could be interpreted perhaps in terms of sensitivity to other points of view. Do you want to say something about that? So it could be openness to new experiences, openness to art. That's a little harder to judge, obviously, but there could be openness to other points of view, right? And openness to people who are not agreeing with you.
And that's an interesting one because up until kind of the last hours of the campaign, he seemed to be very low in openness. I mean, he was not ever willing to kind of falter on any issue or any way, in any kind of action that he did. He would not. He wouldn't apologize for it, and he wouldn't change his behavior. And that's what it seems like a lot of people have liked about him. But now you see, kind of toward the election, he has started to waffle on some issues or pulling the reins a little bit. So,
which then comes back to the question of the social actor, right? Because now we don't know which one is an act,
right?
Or whether he really has changed. That's also a possibility. Although, as you mentioned earlier, Kristian, the personality traits tend not to change that quickly.
Right. So, so how does all of that fit together to kind of create a personality profile?
Yeah, so when we create a personality profile, we don't sort of put them together usually the way that you and I do it. We don't put it together in sort of one rubric. We have those 5, right? So we're not sure about your openness. We judging from just his behavior, he's quite disagreeable. He's not always conscientious, so he's moderately low on conscientiousness. He's extroverted and very low on neuroticism. Is that your opinion as well, Kristian?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
What about Hilary?
So Hilary is, as I take it, to be a lot higher on neuroticism. So remember, that's the being more anxious. She, judging from the way she speaks, she seems to be higher on the agreeableness spectrum. Openness again is a hard one. Extrovertedness, we kind of already dealt with that. They are both extroverted, at least in their behavior. As politicians, you kind of have to be extroverted. What's your take on this, Kristian?
Well, I've definitely noticed there also seems to be a high neuroticism from during the debates. People have said that kind of the general consensus on television has been that she has gotten under Trump's skin when she would say certain things during the debate. That was not my interpretation. My interpretation was give kind of her reaction to certain things he was really pushing her on. She'd kind of show this big smiley laugh. Kind of reminds me of my mother when she'd be really mad at me when I was young, and I'd think I had a good point, and she'd just kind of grin her teeth, and it was kind of a warning, like, you're about to get punished kind of look. And it seems like, to me, that seemed to be kind of corroborate that high neuroticism, is that it would kind of be like a moment of losing her cool. Whereas with Trump, I think that he he definitely loses his cool, but I'm not sure it's I think it might be more of a lack of conscientiousness and not a high neuroticism kind of.
Yeah, so that might be a difference there. Because
he seems to lash out later on. He doesn't seem to lash out immediately. He seems to kind of let fester and then say something that he later claims that he didn't say.
Right. Yeah, going back to the question of agreeableness, there are some interesting stories about Trump that are circulating. The occasional, actually, they're not really viral, but they're circulating the web about Trump, and one story that is supposed to be correct is that a boy, teenage boy, was dying from cancer, terminal cancer, and apparently he really wanted Trump to come out to him and tell him that he was fired from life because he had to die.
So like that, you're fired kind of thing from The Apprentice, right?
Yes. And apparently Trump thought, oh, that's something new. I'll do that. But supposedly when he saw the boy with terminal cancer, he couldn't do it.
Oh, really?
So he instead he took out some of his checks and wrote a check with a big amount of money and gave it to the boy and said, like, go have the time of your life.
Okay.
So there's that, and there's also some former colleagues or people who worked under Trump before he became a political candidate, who said that he was a fair boss, and they seem to. Some of them might be biased. Some of them are definitely not working for the campaign, and so shouldn't be biased. And some of them even state that they're not voting for him, but state that he was a very fair boss. And so that raises the question of to what extent he's a social actor with respect to his disagreeableness.
Right, because if he seems to be agreeable behind the scenes, but his public persona is not that way at all.
Yeah, because again, personality traits, they don't change that quickly. So if the stories are correct, he may be a social actor. So what would the intentions be? Of course, part of it may be that he's low in conscientiousness, so he just blurts out stuff that he shouldn't blurt out. But another part of it may be intentional. What do you think would be the intentions behind trying to be as disagreeable as possible?
Well, I think it energizes a lot of the voting base, and I think in two ways. I think it kind of hits the chords of some people who are really not happy. I mean, obviously on both sides of the election, there's a lot of people that aren't happy with the way things are. And so I think for his base, it seems to stimulate that. And I also think it kind of along those lines, I think it might stimulate people enough to get them to actually vote where they wouldn't vote. I mean, I think they've already said that. I mean, at least I've been paying attention to the kind of early voter turnout, and they've seen in a lot of, at least here in Texas, and kind of across the board, they've seen unprecedented number of people turn out for the election. In the first day, they had about 50% more voters turn out than in the last election. So, and of course, we don't know which side or who they're voting for, because it's not just two sides. But I think kind of that real intense rhetoric gets people going enough to get up and actually participate in the election.
Yeah, so that may be one intention that he has, but could there also be an intention that they go out there and vote for him because his intention probably is not that they just go out and vote.
Right. Well, yeah, for him.
Right, because there could also be those that are pissed off and they're like, yeah, I'm definitely going to go out and vote because this guy pisses me off. So,
and I think there might be kind of a higher order game going on where when you say things that really make the other side angry, I think the voters realize in this election that the opponent's voters are going to run out and vote, and so they better get up and vote, right? And I think it goes for kind of both sides. But I'm not going to vote only because I'm voting for a candidate, but it's in this election, people are making sure the other candidate it doesn't outvote them either. So it's kind of created this kind of competition, I think, among voters.
Yeah, perhaps that's also the that element to it that we saw in England when they were voting about whether to stay in the European Union. No one predicted that they would have a majority of people saying "get out," right?
Right.
And it turned out that to some extent it was at least some people in England said that who had voted no to the European Union had said that, well, we want to express our dissatisfaction with the current status, right, of the things that we are forced to do. We don't want out, but we want to express that we're dissatisfied. So we don't want it to be a big win. But then too many people apparently were thinking the same way. So they were provoked in some sense to do something that, in that case, actually was not what they really wanted. Mm-hmm. And so it can also have that effect, right? It can have that effect that if people are sufficiently dissatisfied with the current political climate, they might be like, okay, let's show some opposition. And how do you show opposition? Well, you might side with the more disagreeable candidate. And that might be something that is part of his intention as well. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
I agree. I think that tactic is what worked for him in the primaries.
Yeah.
So I think all this goes to show that at least it's hard to judge his conscientiousness at this point because we don't really know. All signs point to him being a social actor. So it's hard to.
That's true. But what about the bankruptcy? So, with your background in the law and neuro law and all kinds of law, maybe you have some opinion about the connection between conscientiousness and the bankruptcy.
Yeah, he certainly has, and I think both candidates have done this. They've certainly tried to use certain what I would judge objective disadvantages as an advantage, and so Trump has really rather than say about his bankruptcy, say, well, this was a hard time in my business life and I recovered from it. That's what the standard line is if you talk to a businessman who. The average businessman who's gone through bankruptcy, and there are, enough doing that right now with the oil industry that you could probably find someone on the street here in Houston. Rather than saying that normal line and saying, well, I recovered from it and I worked hard, and he almost celebrates it as kind of something he's used to his advantage to gain to money for himself and to and for his shareholders of his companies.
Yeah.
and it's kind of been a way to deflect the negative energy, and I think Hilary Clinton has done something similar with the whole email scandal. I mean, whether people believe it was a real a scandal or not, she's been able to capitalize on the whole issue by basically saying, well, people who think this is such a big idea just are not thinking straight, right? They're just obsessed with bringing her down and elevating Trump, rather than addressing the actual issues that she was potentially, that the FBI said she was very careless, and she hasn't said I was careless, but that was one time, and I won't do it anymore. And now I'm really careful. I mean, that hasn't come out of her mouth. And Trump hasn't said, that bankruptcy happened a few times with big businesses, but I'm not going to do that again. I'm more careful now. I've matured, I've grown and learned from it. It seems on both sides they haven't addressed it.
Yeah, that seems right. I also wanted to ask you, Kristian, about the so-called sex scandal.
Which one?
Well, I guess sex scandals on both sides of the candidates. But that has also been pointed out, right? I mean, that has been sort of a comeback from Trump, that there have been sex scandals at least in the family on the other side as well. But I was wondering to what extent you think that's hurting or helping, because as we just talked about, disagreeable things can sometimes help candidates.
Right.
So I was wondering what you think about that, and to what extent that hurts or maybe helps.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I think it's kind of hard to know. I think that it really has caused people who are already on one side to dig their heels in. I think that Trump's supporters say, "Oh, I don't even believe any of that," and so that just kind of energizes them even more to go out and try to rectify the issue through voting. I think on the other side, the people who really didn't like Trump to begin with now are adamant about keeping a potential sexual offender out of the White House, right? Of course, that same political party didn't seem to care that much about it when one of their own was caught. And same thing on the Republican side. There have been quite a few Republican congressmen that have been accused of things, and people seem to brush it under the rug.
Yeah, so just like there are swing states, there are also swing voters, right? And what do you think about how will this affect the undecided voters, the voters that sometimes vote Republican and sometimes Democrat?
I think that's kind of hard. I mean, I think that people in this election, it seems like a lot of people don't really know what they believe, right? They know, they have some idea of what they, and I'm talking about the people that are kind of more undecided. Obviously, there's people who really are just on one side, but there seems to be kind of a lack of self-knowledge here, where people aren't really aware that they're not being objective in the way they're interpreting the different facts that are being released on a daily basis about both candidates. I mean, you have a whole group of people who, the real staunch Trump supporters, who, if you ask them, would probably never not think that that you file. They would not agree that you should file bankruptcy to get a leg up on your business, or to keep your car that you should, that you didn't want to pay for. They would say, "Oh, that's really, really bad." But when it comes to their candidate, they're willing to kind of say, "Well, I don't really know. I mean, he's a businessman." And on the other side, you see that Hillary's voters say, "Well, I'd never make that mistake with my email." I mean, I know my grandmother, who has an iPhone, would, knows not to send me credit card numbers over the email, because she's just heard a million times how unsecure it is. I mean, I would think that's kind of a basic fact of the world now, that people with electronic devices know. But then the voters are willing to say, well, it's just a little mistake. I mean, she just, nobody told her. Of course, we found out that people did tell her, but she claimed, and people say, well, nobody really told her that you shouldn't keep a giant server with emails that, whether they're classified or not, you don't want out in the public, probably shouldn't be kept, in a bathroom with, behind a little, one of those locks you can pick with a toothpick, and it's not to say that, one of those is worse than the other, or that either of those things are so bad that anybody's doing anything criminal. But what's interesting to me is that the voters won't at least admit that what their candidates, some of the facts that have come out about their candidates, are just grossly incompetent, right?
Yeah.
Multiple bankruptcies from a lawyer standpoint is a sign of incompetence.
Right.
And not securing stuff that the average guy would secure would be pass a test for incompetence.
Right. And that brings up a different topic. So so I live in Miami, but I was born in Copenhagen, in Scandinavia. And they have a welfare system, and it's a very different system than the American system. And it's very difficult for some of the people who have not lived in the States to even understand why Trump could have supporters. And I think it's difficult to explain, but I think that in some cases I think it may be a question of fairness, in a different sense of the word fairness. So I actually have a little anecdote. So I had a student the other day, and she was from a very, very poor family. And she had a sibling from the same poor family, single mother, worked her butt off in 2 jobs, something like cleaning lady during the day and waitress at night, and saved money despite having to work these low paid jobs. Saved money, enough money that both of them could attend University of Miami and live, which is sometimes a requirement depending on how you get into the college, but live on campus. And we are talking about, for 2 kids, we are talking about 6 figures a year, right? For starters,
right,
before living expenses. So 6 figures, right? For a total of 4 years, or if they really work hard, maybe they can do it a little faster than 4 years, but the standard is 4 years. So we're talking about $500,000 that this woman had to save out of her tips from being a waitress and her cleaning lady job over the years, right? Over the 17 years. So she was apparently very conscientious and started saving right away. And you can see, although I've never spoken to this person, but you can see how if someone came in and said, okay, let's make all the universities free in the States, you can see how a person like that might think, well, I worked my butt off for 17 plus years to have my kids go to the best college in Florida, right? Private university, and now these other, of course, the private university probably wouldn't be free, but now these other kids can just go to college for free. So it may be that people who sort of supports Republican parties or Republican candidates, in more generally speaking, that they're not always the richest people. They're not always the super rich people over here, right? They're sometimes it's rather poor people who are supporters of, say, Trump or other Republican candidates.
Right.
And I think it could be reasons like that. If they really are conscientious and they have foregone pleasures their whole life in order to get their kids to college or something like that, as an example, then they would think, no, we shouldn't have. Why should we have free universities like they have in Denmark? Right? I mean, that may be one thought behind the difference. So that's one thing I've tried to explain when people ask in the Scandinavian countries, how can Trump have supporters? They don't understand it. What do you think? What do you have to add to that in terms of the American mentality?
Well, that kind of also reminded me of one of my best friends is Mexican, and he came here when he was very young, and then his father. There's a whole series of situations, but basically now he's still on even though he's been here for a very long time, he's still on a work visa, and he's had, every couple of years he has issues with having to reapply to stay here.
Yeah.
And and it was interesting watching his kind of reaction to the whole election cycle, because in the beginning when Trump started talking about the wall he wants to build, and about how he said some disparaging things about Mexicans who came over the border, all these things, right, about how they rape and torture and bring drugs over. And
the Mexicans had to pay for the wall as well.
Right. And originally my friend was really offended by it, and he thought that that's like the worst thing he's ever heard, and he was all energized with the whole Mexican base who was very mad at Trump for saying that. And then I kind of watched, though, a shift over time where he started to say, well, wait a second here. He wasn't really talking about, his description doesn't pick me out. It picks out the same people that have always made me really mad my whole life, where, when I'm having to work to stay here, and he doesn't necessarily know people who haven't, but there are people out, the people out there that have had to work also to get here. I mean, there's no downplaying that, but that he's kind of gone through the process, and he now, is very ticked off that in support of Trump in that whole endeavor, because he thinks, well, I had to wait and I had to go through all this stuff to get here.
Yeah.
And so that seems to me that kind of also help me make sense of the voting base that it consists of now. It turns out, it seems like a lot of Hispanic people.
Yeah. Especially, of course, the older generation. So there's the older Cubans in Miami seem to a large extent to be Trump supporters.
Really?
At least in Miami. So it's hard to know, of course, and of course it's anecdotal. I don't have specific numbers on that, but the sort of rich Cubans, so these are the older generation Cubans, tend to be the rich Cubans. Not all of them, of course, but they are the ones that often send their kids to enormously expensive private schools and drive very expensive cars, and they did not. he was talking about Mexicans, but still they're Cubans, and it didn't seem to affect them for some reason. Whereas had he gone after black people, I don't think he would have had the same result. I don't know. I can't quite explain that. I think that would have been a huge drawback.
Right. No, I definitely think so. I have noticed what's very interesting about this election. My wife and I were talking about this. How there's very little signage all over. People really don't want to admit who they're voting for this time. I really don't know. I really can tell you. I do not know who any of my friends are voting for. Well, except for like one or two. There's some on Facebook I know.
I don't either. The only people I know would be voters. So the people in my home country, right, in Scandinavia, would all vote for Clinton. But that's they already have a kind of socialist system there, so it's more democratic. Maybe I shouldn't call it socialist, but it's more similar to the Democratic Party, if anything. And that's actually, the government is actually governed by right-wing people. So the right-wing people are more like the Democrats, and the left-wing people are even more to the left, right? So they don't hesitate to come up with their opinions. They have very, very strong opinions. But I don't know what any of my friends, what they're voting either. No one tells me what they're voting. Well, occasionally I know it from Facebook.
Oh, God. I know.
So there's that, right? But in many cases, I actually don't know. And it's puzzling because in an academic environment, there are very outspoken Democrats. It's just a fact about an academic environment that they're very outspoken Democrats. But not in this election. Of course, there are exceptions. There are people in the law school who are outspoken, but they sort of just walking around talking to people about the election, and some of the initial debates were on campus at the University of Miami, and there was never sort of anyone taking a real stance on anything, or they probably did inside their head, but they never came out and said, "This is what I'm voting." So that makes it a little bit of a mystery how it will turn out at the election. Of course, here in Florida, in Miami, you on the ballot you can put in your own name if you put in an extra name and vote for that person. So that was an idea we had, that we could put in the Superhuman Mind, right, and vote for the Superhuman Mind as president.
I mean, that's what we're really looking for, right? Is a superhuman mind. I mean, we're really looking for a superhuman mind.
We are looking for a superhuman mind, so that would be a good candidate.
In those two.
Definitely. One thing I wanted to ask you, Kristian, is the question of what you should do in terms of voting and what people do. So what you should do, of course, is that you should look at the candidates, if you can look through their BS and find out what they stand for, what they're going to do for the people you care about, or the society you care about, and the world that you want to live in. And then you should put your vote down for that candidate that you think or believe can do that, right? So that would be the package. You would vote for a political package, right? There happens to be a candidate that stands as the head of that package, but it's sort of, if you could look through that, if you could figure out to some extent what will happen or what can happen, what kind of society will develop if one president or one candidate becomes the president versus the other. But I think that a lot of people are going to vote for a personality.
No, I totally agree.
And so what do you think about that? Voting for a personality. It's sort of like being a contestant on a game show, right?
Like The Apprentice.
It's like it's a game show when you're sort of you're not a contestant. You're one of the judges, like America's Got Talent, right? So you're one of the judges, right? And then you have the candidates up on the stage performing their talent acts, balancing on sticks and ladders and or singing, and then you put down your judge, but not necessarily put down your evaluation, but not necessarily on the basis of just their talent, right? In some cases, if you ever watch America's Got Talent, in some cases it's clear that those judges, those 4 judges, that they're also voting for personalities.
I mean, I think that's definitely. I mean, it's becoming increasingly that way now, where people are. I think that we kind of talked about it earlier, that people are kind of willing to ignore facts that don't comport with their voting choice. And so, how do you square their choice with the objective problems that they're making, that they're not acknowledging? I think they're really looking at who they empathize with more and the personality of that person, rather than some of the actual plans behind what they're doing. I mean, you take something like the tax plan. I mean, people seem to, some people support Trump's tax plan, other people support Hillary's tax plan, but both of those plans don't seem to be workable, right? I mean, I mean, economists on both sides have said that both. You get one economist to talk about one guy, one the other, but there's been no economist that's really, or you don't really have a set of economists all saying that one's totally unworkable and the other one's working great. People seem to believe that's the case, but on the one hand, Trump is not wanting to take in enough money to support what we're doing if we cut stuff the way he wants to. And Hillary is not taking in enough money to support the increases that she's trying to also add, or support the things that she's not willing to cut, like the Affordable Health Care Act, things like that. But if you look at it from a bird's eye view, if you go to one of the industries that's affected by this, they'll all tell you the whole system's not working. They're all struggling right now to make it work. But people just kind of gloss over it.
And I think that's interesting, comparing then Scandinavia again to America, because my sense, though, of course, it's just my sense, is that in Scandinavia, when there are elections, people are looking, for instance, at the proposed tax packages, and so there will be individuals who are mostly thinking about themselves. So they will think about sort of they are very poor relative to Scandinavian standards, where no one is really poor. They will look at, can I get more help with my heating bill? And that's nothing to do with taxes, maybe, but will the tax cuts say affect me? Will that I benefit from that? And the rich people in Scandinavia look at it in the same way and say, oh, will that benefit me? And then there's some that are slightly more altruistic and are thinking, well, yeah, maybe this tax cut or increase will not benefit me, but this is the kind of world I want to live in, so I'm voting for this candidate. Whereas here, it seems that people are not doing that, right? They're not looking. I mean, you also say that the plans are not workable, which is correct.
Are you still there? Hey, sorry,
for their
I
choices.
lost you for a second there. Are you there?
Yes.
Sorry, we had a hiccup.
We did.
Yeah, so where you were saying the plans are unworkable is where.
The plans are not workable, but even if they had been workable, let's say that one of the plans had been workable, or let's say that one of them effectively is workable, but that we just don't know it, or the economists don't know it, I still don't think that people are going to go and base their decision-making process on the basis of looking at things like that. There might be some who do that, but I think to a large extent, I think that people are voting for personalities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, you kind of see. I mean, I think that. I mean, and I think it goes. I think that's how people evaluate all the facts is just to fit in with the personality they like. I mean, I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens, and yeah, if nothing else, and you don't know what to vote for, right? You write down, at least in Miami, write down the Superhuman Mind in the spots where you can write your candidate, maybe the Supreme Court judges, right? And then you write the Superhuman Minds and vote for that one.
That is a candidate that could be confirmed to the Supreme Court, I think.
It could, yes. We'll see how many people will actually do it.
All right. Well, see you next week.
We'll see you next week, Kristian. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.